Welcome back. Some have said there's only one solution to the Palestinian and Israel problem, and that's two states existing side by side. But can that be achieved with the call for reconciliation by the Palestinian rival groups and Israel's strong response to halt the peace process? Well, we're joined from Ramallah by Diana Buttu, a former spokesperson for the PLO. Here in Washington, Dan Arbell, a scholar in residence at American University, and Ambassador Marc Ginsberg, who served in the Carter administration. Ambassador Ginsberg, you were going to respond to what Diana Buttu was saying.
Well, I want to make sure that we don't get too bogged down in the polemics here, because the negotiations almost reached an agreement when I was in Jerusalem. And I'm going to say something that most people don't realize. The reason why both sides did not reach an agreement to begin to getting to a framework agreement is at the very last minute, Prime Minister Netanyahu decided unilaterally that he was going to deport 10 of the prisoners that were supposed to have been released, which Israel, by the way, violated its own commitment to release when on schedule. And instead of sending them back to Ramallah, he had made a unilateral decision he was going to deport them to Gaza. That would have violated the terms of the negotiations that Ambassador Indyk and Saeb Erekat and Tzipi Livni, the Minister of Justice and lead negotiator, had reached. And so it's an indication to me that good faith was lacking at that particular moment. It was unnecessary for Mr. Netanyahu to pull that prank out. It basically sabotaged what may have been an agreement reached by the parties. Mr. Abbas, I've been critical of him too, so let's not take this that I'm piling on Mr. Netanyahu. But at that very moment, Mr. Netanyahu did not have to do what he did. It spoiled the atmosphere to reach an agreement.
A spoiler, Professor Arbell?
Well, the issue of releasing of prisoners, Palestinian prisoners with blood on their hands who participated in murders and terrorist activities is a very sensitive issue in the Israeli public. And when a leader goes and decides to release prisoners, as the Netanyahu government has done in previous rounds, he has to take in consideration the context in which he does that. If Prime Minister Netanyahu was ready to release the fourth batch of prisoners, but he asked for a commitment from the Palestinians that they're going to be willing to extend the process, which was to end tomorrow, April 29th, beyond the April 29th deadline. Once he did not get enough assurances that this was going to take place, he, on his part, decided not to go ahead with the release of prisoners, rightly so, I think. If you are, as Mark said, negotiating in good faith, then good faith has to be presented by all parties concerned. I'm afraid that the Palestinians have not shown good faith in their negotiations by running to join different UN conventions, UN organizations, in contrast to their promise, to their commitment to Secretary Kerry at the time in the summer of 2013 not to do so. So I agree that on one hand, all parties need a timeout to calm down, so to see where things are going, and to try very soon, in the very near future, to try and get back to the negotiating table. I think, as Mark said, we can spread blame equally on all sides. What's important is to get this peace process back on track, to get the two-state solution, which is, I think, an issue very important to the Israeli government, back on the table, on the way to implementation.
Okay, Diana, do you buy that it was a bit short-sighted on the part of the Palestinians to seek nationhood, to seek statehood, to join UN organizations?
I think it's important to keep in mind exactly what conventions that the Palestinians have signed. They signed a convention that condemns genocide. They signed a convention that condemns racism. They're the first Arab country to sign a convention that says that they are opposed to the discrimination against women without reservation. They signed a convention that speaks against torture. These are the conventions that President Abbas signed. Now, if there is a problem with signing conventions that are against genocide, against torture, against racism, and against discrimination against women because it upsets a peace process, then there's clearly something wrong with the peace process. But even going back to that, I think it's important to address the context with which both of your distinguished guests have mentioned. During this same period of negotiations, these 9 months that we were talking about, the Israeli government announced more than 12,000 housing units, more than 12,000 settlements during this period. 120 23% increase since the year before. In addition, 67 Palestinians were killed by the Israelis and 126 Palestinian homes demolished. This is the atmosphere that we're talking about. So rather than condemning a president for signing a convention that opposes genocide, racism, torture, and is in support of anti-discrimination measures against women, we should be applauding these measures rather than condemning them.
Professor Arbell, settlement construction continues. It has shown again and again to be a major stumbling block in these negotiations.
Yeah, well, the settlement issue is part of one of the core issues that is under discussion between the negotiators.
Does Israel recognize that it is violating international law by building settlements?
Israel sees its right to settle in those areas. Israel sees the implementation of the Fourth Geneva Convention. It is done in a proper manner. Clearly, Israeli settlement policy has been restrained and restricted in comparison to previous years. Prime Minister Netanyahu took unprecedented measures back in 2010 as a show of goodwill not to continue free settlement activity for a period of 9 months, was unmet, was not reciprocated in any way by the Palestinian negotiators, who failed to come to the negotiating table. So clearly, even such measures are there's never too much, never enough.
Okay,
it's an issue which will be settled as part of the final status issues. Settlements is one of them.
Right, it's a volatile issue. I want to get a quick response from Diana Buttu, then I want to go back to Ambassador Ginsberg. Diana?
The settlements are illegal. Every nation around the world has recognized them as illegal. The Israelis know that they're illegal. But this precisely brings home my point, which is that the Israelis do not recognize the application of international law. They view themselves as above the law, and they view the Palestinians as beneath the law. It's only when they begin to recognize that they are not above the law and that the Palestinians are not beneath the law that we will be able to move forward. But until such time, we're going to continue to remain in this situation. And Israel is not only heading towards apartheid, it already has reached the state of apartheid.
Ambassador Ginsberg, where does that leave the United States right now? What's next for Secretary Kerry?
Well, in the long cavalcade of plans and ideas and policy initiatives that have been undertaken since Henry Kissinger all the way through all the plans that you and I are familiar with, the fact of the matter is that it's clear that both parties at this point in time are unwilling and unready to make the concessions necessary to meet the basic objectives of the other. And so Secretary Kerry is going to continue focusing, as he has said, not just on trying to rebuild a constituency inside Israel and Palestine, to place more pressure on the leaders of both countries. After all, poll after poll says that Israelis and Palestinians want a two-state solution. It's their leaders who are not listening to the will of the people. So that's number one. Number two, there's no doubt that the Secretary also is focusing a great deal of effort, along with Tony Blair and the quartet, to help rebuild Palestine's economy and to provide younger Palestinians hope for a progress and support for a two-state solution, which is one of the reasons why I'm CEO of PeaceWorks and the One Voice movement there. So I think at the same time, let's also be realistic. Mr. Kerry has a lot of other issues on his plate: Ukraine, Syria, this pivot. He's devoted a considerable amount of time. I think it's also up to the parties to recognize that he and the United States did not just make this commitment unending, that they both, if they want the United States to serve as the honest broker, then they're both going to have to try to accommodate the goals and objectives of the United States to help the United States achieve the goal that it wants to achieve for both parties. After all, what the United States wants here is nothing more than either party wants. Two states living in peace side by side, Israel safe and secure with a strong, viable, prosperous Palestinian state. That's the goal of U.S. policy here. It's a policy that has permitted the United States to play this role. It's now up to the parties to take advantage of that role.
Professor Arbell, Ambassador Ginsberg made a very good distinction there. He said that what the Israeli people want and what the Israeli leaders are doing are two different things. Do you agree?
I disagree. I think that all parties concerned, parties in the coalition and headed by the government, I think the government is acting, reflecting the will of the people. Polls have shown that Israelis, by far and wide majority, support the two-state solution, yet they're very skeptical about the Palestinian leadership and skeptical about chances of making that happen because they don't trust the Palestinians. Simply, there is deep distrust. The Palestinians have to step up And I think that what Mahmoud Abbas did in recent days, as to come out and issue a statement condemning the Holocaust, was a positive step, a right step in that direction. Right. More steps such as that need to be made in order to gain the trust of the Israeli people.
Okay, that's where we have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for joining us. That is it for this edition of The Heat. We'd love to hear from you, so please send us your questions, comments, and story ideas to theheat@cctv-america.com. Once again, that's theheat@cctv-america.com. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for being with us.